Hello, this is King Rex coming at you with another video. This is a ranking of James Bond villains. I'm ranking one main villain per film. I'm not ranking any side villains here, and I'm not doing any henchmen either. These are just the main villains that James Bond fought. It should also be noted that if Blofeld showed up in a movie, but he wasn't the main villain that Bond fought, like say in From Russia with Love or Thunderball, I'm ranking the main villain, and Blofeld's not being ranked in those films. But I also want to point out that I am ranking each of Blofeld's performances. I see him as a main villain separate from one another because he was played by different actors and he was played very differently and sometimes written very differently. Before I start, I would like to go through some honorable mentions. These are people that I didn't consider to be the main villain in a Bond film, but I also didn't consider them to be henchmen. Um, as a henchman, they're generally just that's someone who's working for the main villain. These people are either partners with the main villain or they had their own ends that they were trying to um, get to on their own. The first one is Kronstein and From Russia with Love. I thought he was always kind of interesting. He just doesn't hardly get any screen time. I think the issue with that film was there was so much there that he just didn't really get much development. But he wasn't just a henchman because he was on the same level with Rosa Klebb within that movie. They both were made lieutenants of Blofeld. The next one is General Gogol, and and For Your Eyes Only. Um, he actually did show up in a lot of Bond films, but in this one he was sort of a co-villain, but he was kind of wasn't the main villain that Bond fought. In the other films, you could argue that he was actually a Bond ally most of the time, or rather kind of just a benign character that was neither an ally or a villain. But in this one film, he was a main villain. General Orlov from Octopussy. I think he was a very good co-villain because he was kind of like a madman villain where he was really over the top, but I think it really worked. You're going to notice that there are a lot of Russian generals in these villains. Another one is Brad Whitaker from The Living Daylights. He's not a Russian general. I don't think he really is a general. I think he's a guy that just kind of saw himself as some military leader that he really wasn't. I thought he was another one that was interesting, but just wasn't explored a whole lot within the movie. I like the idea that he would try to set up, have like miniature battles set up like on game tables and try to change how the battle went if he had fought it himself. I have more honorable mentions here. One is Milton Crest. He's another guy that people tend to say that he's actually a henchman, but he isn't a henchman because he didn't. He wasn't someone that just worked for Sanchez in that movie. He was more like a partner to him, where Sanchez brought the drugs in. He gave Sanchez the money, and then he sold the drugs. So he almost was like a customer or a partner with Sanchez, and not really a henchman. I actually think he was pretty good too. And if you think you recognize this guy from somewhere, it's probably from a western because he did a lot of westerns at the time. Another one is General Umurov, very hard name to pronounce, and from Goldeneye. Once again, he did not work for the main villain. He kind of worked towards his own goals. They were like partners, but he certainly was no henchman, and he wasn't actually the man in charge either. They were partners. Um, Mr. White from Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace. He was also in Spectre, but in Spectre, I don't consider him a villain. He actually was in that movie. In that respect, he was more of a actually a Bond ally. But it was obvious to me in Casino Royale that he kind of was above Le Chiffre, but he doesn't get enough time in that movie to be the main villain. I think they should have made him the main villain in Quantum of Solace, but they decided to go in another direction. And the last one is Max Denba from Spectre. He basically was the new C and kind of he worked with Blofeld and Spectre in order to get some big surveillance thing put up. He's kind of like a useful idiot in that more way more than anything, but he did work towards his own goals. So now we're going to start with my ranking of Bond villains. I'm only ranking people that were in the 25 Eon Bond production movies. I'm not ranking the other movies. Number 25 for me is the Ernest Stavro Blofeld, played by Christopher Waltz, Inspector. He was also in No Time to Die. Christopher Waltz is a great actor, and Blofeld is generally a great villain, but they really dropped the ball here. They kind of copied the Goldmember Austin Powers movie by making him Bond's brother. He also acted in a manner that would really not fit with the way Blofeld acted, especially in the end scene where he basically tells Bond to finish it to kill him off, which Blofeld would never do such a thing. So I think really this was a matter of really bad writing within that movie, and also the whole way they shoehorned in the entire Blofeld Inspector into the Bond universe at that point, and they were using a multi-movie continuity, so it really didn't fit right. Plus, if he was Bond's brother, they should have had familiarity with each other, which they really didn't have. Number 24 is Gustav Graves, played by Toby Stevens from Die Another Day. The beginning part, where it's the other guy, because it's basically played by two people, he gets some sort of weird surgery that changes him to a white guy, like some sort of DNA thing, which is kind of oddball. The original guy that played his last name of Moon was actually pretty decent as a villain, but I think that when this guy comes into the movie, he kind of is just really a bad villain. He's too over the top in the wrong way. Plus, they stole the entire plot from Diamonds Are Forever and kind of made it worse. Plus, just the way he acts, kind of smarmy. It's not. He's just not a good villain. I mean, um, this is one where I think they really dropped the ball as well with bad writing. The bad thing is that movie had good writing through the entire first half, and about the time when he comes in is where it starts to go downhill. Number 23 is Dominic Green from Quantum of Solace. This one is one I just don't understand at all. You had a great setup to have Mr. White as the main villain in Quantum of Solace, and he would have been a really great villain, I think, if they would have used him that way. Dominic Green just does not feel like a dangerous, powerful villain. He seems kind of weak and feckless. Plus, the whole entire plot of his evil master plan is to sell water at a profit, which is something that regularly happens. I could see if this movie would have been made back in the 60s when it would have been, seemed like kind of a laughable idea to profit from selling water, but in the 2000s, it's normal for people to buy bottled water. So making that an evil master plan's kind of weird. And I think really he was a horrible choice as a villain. He seems more like the guy that'd be running a Dairy Queen or a Burger King at like the night manager of one of those places than a evil mastermind. Number 22 is Blofeld, played by Telly Savalas. Telly Savalas is another great actor. I just think the problem with Telly Savalas is he doesn't fit the role. They already had a Blofeld built up over several movies. You see him, part of him in From Russia with Love. You see part of him in Thunderball. Then we meet him as played by Donald Pleasance in You Only Live Twice. So they already built this up, and then it's pretty jarring when you see Telly Savalas, who's nothing like Donald Pleasance, and he acts nothing in the manner that Donald Pleasance did within those that within You Only Live Twice. Pleasance matched what came before him. Telly Savalas didn't. They didn't even try to put like the fake scar on his eye. You think they would have at least went that far? To me, he seems more like a mob boss or a heavy than he would like an evil mastermind. I think he would have been better if they'd had him play a villain that was not Blofeld, maybe in a different movie, or if they'd have made him a henchman within the movie and still had Donald Pleasance there. I think that could have worked, but he just wasn't right for the part. So that's why he falls here. Number 21 is Leistopher Safin, another great actor, which it seems almost like a like something that's happened over and over again. We had a great actor play a villain, and they just don't. It just doesn't work right. I think a lot of it has to do with the writing. I think he would have worked well, but they kind of just messed up the writing altogether in No Time to Die. because his main motivation at the first part of the film is to as a revenge plot against Spectre. Once he destroys Spectre, he wants to destroy the world, and there's never no reason they give you why his motivations change, why he wants to do this. Um, like I said, I think this one a lot like Christoph Waltz is just completely destroyed by the writing. I don't think anybody could have pulled off Safin just because of the poor writing within that movie. Aristotle Christados, he's here more or less because he's just kind of boring and forgettable. Also, even though he's the main villain in the movie, he's basically a middleman that's a junior partner um, to Jennifer Gogol because he's just retrieving the machine that needs to be that the Russians want. So he's kind of a middle of the road guy. The only interesting thing about him is that he tried to convince Bond that someone else was the bad guy. Plus, he seems to just act worse and worse as the movie goes. It's like at the beginning, you can kind of believe he might be a good guy, and he just seems to get eviler and eviler as the film goes on. When you're looking at a movie that's maybe a little over 2 hours, it just seems like he's changing too much throughout that movie. I don't see it much as building a character up as just he's, oh, we're going to make him do worse and worse things simply to show you how bad he is. And it also even hints that he has a relationship with the young ice skater who it's hard to tell what age she is, but the actress was 19, but some people say she was supposed to be like 16 in the movie. That makes it seem as though he's trying to have a romantic relationship with her. At least that's kind of how I read it within the movie. And it makes him seem like he's an abusive person towards the end of the movie, though he never seems abusive at the beginning or the middle towards her. So just, I think like they thought, well, we need to make him a little more evil here. So they just kind of added a few more evil plot lines. Like he was the Diet Cola of evil at the beginning of the movie. Like, like they say in Austin Powers, just 1 calorie, not evil enough. So they have to up the evil in him as the movie goes on. Georgy Koskov, another one. He actually was kind of decent as a slimy character that, kind of tricks MI6 to get his to meet his ends within the movie. He screws over his girlfriend in it, but still, I think maybe because there were two main villains in this movie, he was more the senior partner, but I think maybe just gets squeezed out a little bit in the Living Daylights because of Whitford more. So maybe that's just what happens. He gets a little squeezed out within that movie because of having another main villain that's actually, in my opinion, a more interesting character. Now we get to Ernest Stavro Blofeld, played by Charles Gray. A lot of people really go after him for this role, especially because at one point he's disguised as a woman, and they make it seem like he just dressed in drag for no reason, as if he was just doing it for laughs or something as a joke. But it was a disguise that shows that Blofeld would do what it takes to sneak away. So I don't think that him being dressed as a woman really, if you view it in the context of the movie, it's not as bad as when people take it out of context and make it sound. I think he did a decent job as Blofeld, but I think part of the thing that he's hurt by is you had a great performance by Pleasance, then you had a completely different performance by Telly Savalas, and then you have him coming in another performance. It makes things seem a bit uneven between the three Blofelds. And I think he kind of hurt by that perspective. Plus, it's really more or less he's this low on the list because there are so many other good villains. It's not that he was bad, it's just that everyone else was better that's above him. Number 17, Dr. No. Um, I think Joseph Wiseman did a great job playing Dr. No. They built the villain up really well throughout the entire movie. It's just that we don't see him till the very end, so it's more a mystery and who is this Dr. No guy? Almost is the way it's set up. I think they set it up in such a manner that if it hadn't been the first movie in the film, he would have probably survived and had another movie. He's almost set up as the pre-Blofeld guy because there's a lot of things about him, like the way he dresses and the way he acts, that is reminiscent of Blofeld, Hugo Drax, and a few other villains like Stromberg. but because they didn't know if there would be a second movie, they couldn't like have him survive to have Bond have to fight him another day, which I think would have been good in hindsight, but they didn't know that it would be a situation where they'd have another movie to bring Doctor No back. Emilio Largo from Thunderball, I think he does a good job. I think he's kind of outshined in this movie a little bit um, by Fiona Volpe because she's such an amazing femme fatale in that movie. So he's really one of these guys. He's probably the first one on this list that's here because he was outshined by his henchmen, which kind of drops him down a bit. He did have style and class, and he was kind of the mirror image of Bond if Bond was evil because he kind of enjoyed the same things that Bond did. He just worked for the forces of bad rather than the forces of good. Carl Stromberg, another one that's outshined by his henchmen. Jaws was better in this movie than he was in Moonraker. Stromberg, I think, was written to be like Blofeld. And if they'd had the rights to Blofeld, they lost the rights after I think Diamonds Are Forever might have been the last movie they could put Blofeld in. Maybe one more movie after that, but they chose not to. I think he would have been. I think it would have been a Blofeld villain type. I think it would have been Blofeld if they had the rights to Blofeld, but the rights were gone at that point, so they couldn't use him. So Carl Stromberg kind of was a stand-in. I think he's very well played, but once again, he kind of gets outshined by Jaws. You also have a really great performance by a lot of other characters within the movie. Anya's great as the Russian spy, so I think those things kind of like push him down a little bit because there's a lot of great things in that movie. Even though he does a great job, I think he just kind of gets outshined a little bit. Hugo Drax, basically like Carl Stromberg, and the movies are similar in many ways. Instead of Stromberg's thing of building a society under the ocean, he tries to build one up in space. Um, I think he does do a little bit better job as a villain, so he is one place higher. Even though the movie he was in wasn't as good, Jaws was still good in this movie as his main henchman, but I still think he was even better and more menacing in um, The Spy Who Loved Me than he was in Moonraker. So Michael Lonsdale's Hugo Drax falls to 14th here. I think he's a lot like Dr. No and Carl Stromberg, though. He's just like the strongest of those three that are very similar villains. Franz Sanchez, played by Robert Davey. He does a great job. He's a different type of Bond villain because he's more of a drug lord than an evil mastermind, but he's still pretty maniacal and a sadist. And it's basically a revenge plot and License to Kill, which is the movie he was the main villain in. Still, he does a great job with the role. Maybe one of the best performances Robert Davey ever had was in this movie. Rosa Klebb, this one might be a little controversial just because people might think I put her up a bit high. I just think she does a great job within this movie as the main villain. She kind of plays, both sides against each other, kind of like the evil mastermind behind the scenes, because she has Tatiana and Bond both working toward opposite ends, so that Spectre can end up with the special device in the movie. So I think she does a great job. I also kind of like the whole poison tip in the shoe thing she tries to use. And you can actually, she does a great job showing the amount of fear people have for Blofeld when he's just sitting there talking to him. If you watch that scene where she's talking to him, where she thinks he's going to off her because of the failure instead of Kronstein, you can just see the fear in her. So I think her performance goes a long way for putting her up this high on the list. Dr. Kananga, by Yaphet Kotto. Another great villain. One thing about his is that he does have an entire menagerie of henchmen that are very interesting within the movie. So I think that might be that there's so many good actors that might kind of hurt him a little bit because there is a lot of people doing great acting within the movie, so might make him shine a little less. Once again, a great villain. Live and Let Die is a kind of an underrated movie, I believe. It does have kind of a silly death at the end, but other than that, Just a great all around movie. Le Chiffre, played by Mads Mikkelsen, another guy that's seems very refined like Bond until he gets pushed to his ends. Then he kind of goes off the deep end of crazy, but I think he's in a position where if he doesn't get the money, he's probably going to be killed. So it would make sense that he would go that way. And he is an evil guy before that point. Um, so definitely a really good villain. I think he really started off the Dino Craig era right, even though you saw a few of his other villains falling down pretty low on the list. I think that's one of the big deciders of whether a Dino Craig movie is good is how good the villain is. Because when he had good villains and good writing, the movies were good. When they dropped the ball with the villains and the writing, the movies struggled quite a bit. Matt Zorn, played by Christopher Walken. Christopher Walken seems like a guy who's almost born to play a Bond villain. I don't think the movie he's in is the greatest Bond movie. It does kind of hurt him a little bit there, but I think he does a great job with what he has. I also like that it's a unique plot, that he just wants to do something that's evil so he can make a lot of money, which is kind of a realistic thing that people do. Granted, his plot's a little off the wall and stuff, but I think he does a great job of pulling off the character. Alec Trevelyan, another one played by Sean Bean. He's kind of has a lot of great villains around him within the movie, a lot of great acting. Um, Xenia Onatopp really shines as the hench, I guess I'd say henchwoman here. He also has Boris within the movie who's good. And the general, so he's got a lot of, there's like four good bad guys in the GoldenEye. He does play Bond, basically if Bond turned to the dark side type character because he's an ex double O agent who kind of went bad within this film. So I think that he's a kind of a great contrast. I think it's why the movie really works. It's not quite a top five, but he is a top 10 Bond villain. Elliot Carver, I know people would most likely put him below um, Alec on this list, but I just think he plays the role so well. You wouldn't expect a newsman to be as flamboyant as he is, and he makes it work. So I think the acting is really great by Jonathan Pryce in this movie, and that's what lifts him up to this point. He also, even though he has a decent cast behind him, he doesn't have the side villains and the henchmen that Alec does, which maybe that makes him carry the movie a little bit more, which puts him up the list a little higher for me, just one slot up. Raul Silva, another great villain. Really, this picture almost, 100% says what he's about. He's very menacing and insane. This is basically a well-written villain that his whole entire thing is he feels wronged by M, so he goes after her. So once again, I think this is a great villain they put in, and I think he really works well as a just a maniacal, crazy villain. The only thing that's negative here, which isn't his fault, is that they try to shoehorn him in as part of Spectre, where he wasn't part of Quantum, which is what which kind of Spectre took over for when they got the rights to Spectre. But you can't blame his performance. I just kind of look at that as a inconsistency within those films, the shoehorning of Spectre. When I get to my top five, Kamal Khan. I think he's probably the most underrated villain, and he's probably, this would be what I might get a little flack for. I think he just does a great job as kind of a slimy and devious villain. People look at he's kind of a junior villain, but he really isn't. He's working people towards his own ends. He wants to smuggle the jewelry out of the out through the circus, and he uses Octopussy to help smuggle it. And he also uses the crazy general as a way to help smuggle that out. So I think he's using those guys to get his own ends because he was going to blow Octopussy up and take all the jewelry for himself. And basically, he didn't care if he set off nuclear weapons and killed a bunch of people just so he can become rich. I think he's really a far better villain than he gets credit for. Electra King, another one that I think is underrated. I think the whole idea that she kind of pretends to be innocent and kind of has most everybody fooled. Although I think within the movie, the only negative I would say is Bond figures her out too quickly. I think they shouldn't have had him because he figures out what she's doing, then he falls for her, then she double crosses him. And I think that having Bond figured it out was exactly the wrong thing. I could see maybe if another character kind of pointed out and was dismissed, but having Bond do it, I think was a little bit of a issue in the writing. But I think she does a great job as Electric King Sophie does, and I think she's really another one of these underrated Bond villains. Now we get to Donald Pleasance's Ernest Blofeld. Um, Really, if you had told me to write down a list without thinking about it, I probably would have automatically put him number one, which tells you how great the two people ahead of him are. He basically makes the role. He is the quintessential Bond villain. He has a great performance, and he only lived twice. And he does fit in with what we saw of Blofeld in the previous movies. I think it actually was a major mistake that they opted not to bring him back for Her Majesty's Secret Service and decided to bring in Telly Savalas, and it was the director's decision not to bring him back. It wasn't Donald Pleasance that wasn't available. Once again, great villain. I think when people rate Blofeld, sometimes he's downrated because of the other performances of Blofeld, but Donald Pleasance does deserve his spot in the top three. Number two is Scaramanga, played by Christopher Lee. This is another mirror image villain of Bond. Realistically, the only difference here is that he's basically just an assassin for hire, whereas Bond is a MI6 agent. Very gentlemanly in the movie. I think he just played it absolutely perfect. I think a lot of people would have screwed up the performance within this movie, and he plays it to perfection. I also like the entire dynamic between him and Nick Nack as the henchman, because it's kind of reverse. You'd have thought the small guy Nick Nack would have been the evil mastermind, and the big Christopher Lee, I think's like 6'4" or something, a pretty imposing guy, would have been the henchman. But it's reversed and it works perfectly. So if you've been paying attention, it'll be no surprise. My number one goes to Arik Goldfinger, played by Gert Frobe. Probably pronounced that last name wrong. Once again, I think he's the quintessential Bond villain too. He just plays the role so well and perfectly. Um, and I know most people do put him up at the top of the list, but he really does earn that spot. The part within Goldfinger where Bond says, "Do you want me to talk? Or do you think you're going to get me to talk?" And he says, "No, I want you to die." And he starts going up the steps. That's perfect. He does do some of the villain tropes where he explains the entire evil master plan out when he doesn't have to, but that's really done for the audience more than they would do this within the story. I think the plan was a great one. Bombed the Fort Knox to make the gold within there unusable. So I think that was great, and a lot of other things. Remaking the body panels of his Rolls Royce in gold so he can smuggle them out of the country is another thing that's kind of a very intelligent thing. Um, so once again, Art Goldfinger does get my top spot. I'd like to thank you for watching. Like, share, subscribe, comment, and have a great day.